right, everybody, it is now 7 o'clock and
Recording in progress.
good evening, everybody. This is the May 9th, 2022 meeting of the Mansfield Town Council, and I am calling the council to order. Ms. Chain, would you call the roll, please?
Osberger.
Mr. Osberger has sent a message that he may be delayed.
Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder.
Here.
Coleman.
Here.
Bertoni.
Here.
Katchenberger.
Also delayed.
Moran.
Here.
Curran.
Here.
Shaken.
We are still operating in a hybrid manner. We have two counselors who are calling in from someplace other than the town council. Our town manager is also calling in from his office since he has been exposed to COVID and has some sniffles himself, so he figured it would be safer not to expose the rest of us. So here's Mr. Katchenberger. Whoever is running this Zoom meeting, could you click the got it button so it gets, that square gets off the screen? Thank you. All right, the first item of business is an opportunity for the public to address the council, and I know that the room feels fuller than it has in a very long time, but most of the people who are here are to present an item on the agenda, which we look forward to hearing about later on. However, is there anybody here from the public who wishes to address the council on any other item? Seeing no hands, I will declare this part of the agenda closed. The next item is the report of the town manager, Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to keep my report brief to try to preserve my voice this evening. We had our latest round of negotiations with the firefighters union this past week, or maybe it was a couple weeks ago at this point. I've kind of lost track. I think it was last week. Conversations are positive, and we have our next labor meeting May 23rd. We had an initial meeting, town staff and Attorney Deneen did, that is, with representatives from Yukon relative to our what I'll call the intermunicipal sewer agreement, multi-year sewer agreement that, as the council knows, our current agreement is set to expire at the end of June. So we've started discussions around a successor agreement. We have a follow-up meeting with them on this Wednesday. And I think, some of the goals and objectives and concerns that the parties have relative to the provisions of the agreement, we were able to lay those out in front of each other for the most part this past meeting, and we will continue to do that, albeit with a little bit more detail in the next meeting. The town, as I previously reported, received several proposals in response to a request for proposals for the Quint fire apparatus. This is the apparatus that the fire department is looking to procure using small cities grant money. And we have selected a vendor. Bulldog Fire Apparatus was deemed to be the most qualified and most advantageous vendor that bid. However, it's important to note that all bids that the town received did in fact come in above our budget based on the grant amount. In this case, it's about $300,000 over. It's about $1.4 million bid on a project we have $1.1 million budget for. And so staff are working to come up with some recommendations that can be presented to council about where that gap funding can be identified. So stay tuned for more discussion on that front. I want to make sure that the public's aware that we have an online survey that was published in recent weeks. It's open until May 31st relative to cannabis establishment regulations. We want to get as much public feedback as possible. And this is an easy way for the public to provide feedback to to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if you just go to the town's website, you'll find that from the town's homepage, the survey is very easily found. I think it's in the news section. I wanted to mention that I had a nice meeting in the last week or so with the Commission on Aging at the Senior Center. It was on my radar that there had been some interest among members of the Commission on Aging with respect to the municipal facilities needs assessment study, and in particular, what ideas are being batted around for both the senior center as well as the alternative future uses of the surplus schools, which may be good candidates for either senior housing or some sort of, I'll say, senior amenities. So we had, I thought, a really good open discussion. I tried to provide a quick summary about where we were in terms of the phase of the work, emphasizing that we're still very early on in sort of the idea generation phase, this phase one, and that there will be opportunity for stakeholder input along those lines in the months ahead, but certainly took advantage of the audience I had with the Commission on Aging folks to receive some of their feedback, which I found was very insightful, very constructive. So I appreciate that very much. And then lastly, obviously it was a busy weekend with UConn graduation events spanning 3 different days, and knock on wood, according to our resident trooper supervisor, Sergeant Merrill, it sounds like things went pretty well over the last few days. Not anything out of the ordinary in terms of call response or calls for service and their response, or vehicular accidents, other things that require a police presence. So I think, knock on wood, it sounds like things went pretty well this weekend, all things considered. And congratulations to UConn class of 2022 for graduating. I'll end my report there. Happy to field any questions.
Questions for Mr. Aylesworth? Members of the council? Mr. Coleman?
The $1.3 million, the bid for the fire apparatus, what are we actually purchasing for $1.3 million?
So that's the lion's share. I mean, nearly all of that. I'd have to defer to Linda Painter for a breakdown of the small percentage that doesn't specifically go to the hard costs of the apparatus itself. I think like there's, there might be some costs associated with, maybe she's, do I see she's coming online now? Maybe not. In any case, she is there. Linda, I mean, am I correct in saying that the vast majority of that is going directly towards the acquisition of the apparatus?
Yes. So the original budget that was filed had $50,000 for grant administration costs in there. We are not going to be anywhere close to that. The only things we are spending money on right now, or have spent money on to this point, are required legal notices for publication of the RFP. We will also need to have a public hearing, but none of the staff time that's gone into it has been charged, and we did not use a consultant for doing the implementation of this grant. So we expect that we'll be able to do a budget amendment to transfer a large portion of that $50,000 into the actual acquisition.
What are we acquiring here for apparatus?
Chief, do you want to speak to some of the details about what a quint is and what we use it for?
I'll do my best.
I was inviting Chief Mitchell. I saw he was.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I did
Chief.
not.
Sorry, Linda.
That's okay.
Chief.
That's okay. Sorry, Chief.
That's okay. No worries. Good evening, everyone. Basically, what a quint is it's a ladder truck that has a pump and a tank on it. So it's actually 2 trucks in one. It'll have the capabilities. It'd be a 103-foot aerial ladder, which will allow us to reach the roofs of some of just about every building we have in town, especially with the downtown area and the proposed standard at 4 corners with the height of the buildings, but also gives us the opportunity to be able to put fires out with it. Because if you look at the bigger departments, they have their standard pumpers and their standard ladder trucks. Ladder trucks have ladders on it, and they do all the ladder company functions, where a pump attacks the fire, puts the fire out. So basically, we're getting 2 trucks in one that will serve this town for, for the next 25 years once it's delivered.
So are we, is this an addition or a replacement, chief?
We'll end up replacing one of our pumps.
Okay,
Mr.
and
Coleman, this is a purchase that's been on the books for at least 2 or 3 years.
that could be, I just want to clarify it, that's
Yeah,
all.
I understand. I understand. I just want you to know this is not something that's made up, that's just coming now. We have had very full presentations on the need for this truck and probably before you joined the
I'm
council.
just trying to get a quick clarification, Madam Mayor, that's all.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we don't have ladders that will reach the tallest buildings in town, most probably Store Center, is that correct?
All we have on our pumpers is ground ladders. The longest ladder we have is 35 footer, and it's what they call a ground ladder. So this is going to give us capabilities that we haven't had before.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for
Thank
the
you.
clarification.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any further questions for the town manager? Hearing none, gone. We will move on to reports and comments of council members. I'll begin. Tomorrow is the Mansfield Town Meeting. We have secured the services of Bruce Cluett, who has done this in the past, to be moderator. It's always nice to have a familiar and reassuring voice at the podium, somebody who is able to handle complex parliamentary questions if necessary, and Bruce has always been able to do that. So we really would like to extend our thanks to Mr. Cluett for joining us again, and we urge all of you who are listening to join us at the Mansfield Middle School Auditorium tomorrow evening at 7 for the town meeting. And this is a remnant of an earlier form of local governance that we have preserved. It's in Mansfield. It serves a very important function in that people get an opportunity to learn about what we have done with the budget, to ask questions, to try to add or subtract from the budget depending on what they see we have overlooked. And so, again, I extend an invitation. Does any other council member have a report or comment? Ms. Berthelot?
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to let everybody in the community know that the E.O. Smith Drama Club is going to be the work of a senior. It's a musical, and it's been written and directed by Emma Jane Smith. It's being sponsored by the E.O. Smith Drama Club. It is Saturday, May 21st at 7:30 and Sunday, May 22nd at 2:30. It's called Antler Song, and anybody who goes will have the opportunity to say they saw the first production of this particular piece and the first piece of work by Emma Jane Smith. I hope to see everybody there.
Well, to add to that, as the middle school is doing The Lion King at this point, so we have multiple opportunities for dramatic experiences in town. Anybody else? Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, this is for you. In an April 28th school building committee meeting, you accused me of recruiting the public to post on social media. I want to discount that claim completely. I have not recruited anybody. Everybody has come to me.
I don't recall what you're speaking of, but I understand your position. Okay, is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Seeing none, I will call this part of the agenda closed. The next item is the consent agenda. For our new middle school students who don't know this, very often legislative bodies create what is called a consent agenda. This is and things are moved to this agenda about which there is basically no discussion. These are routine pro forma kinds of things, and they are lumped into a single item and voted on all at once. It's a time-saving modification to the agenda. And we have 4 items on tonight, 3 sets of minutes, an appointment to the Mansfield Board of Ethics, a submission from Planning and Zoning regarding a Yukon environmental impact statement, and also our financial statements for the town dated March 31st. Okay. Would somebody move the consent agenda?
I would like to pull 2 items out of the consent agenda,
Which
Madam
two?
Mayor. Mirror Lake and the financial statements for the town.
All right, we will move Mirror Lake to new business, and we will put it as F. And we will move the financial statements to old business, and we will make them B. Financial statements occur quarterly. How can they be new business? It's a new financial statement, but financial statements come quarterly. So I think we review the town's budget and expenditures all the time. All right, so what's left is the minutes and the Mansfield Board of Ethics. Mr.
I
Shaker,
move to adopt the consent agenda.
is there a second? Mr. Bruder seconds. Any, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, the consent agenda has been adopted. The next item is the financial statements dated March 31st, which we have added as an old business. We need to have a motion to amend the agenda to add financial statements under old business and the Mirror Lake under new business, item F. Somebody, Mr.
Mayor, do we need that motion?
I'll move it.
Can we just do that if we pull items from?
If you say we can do it without a motion, I will do it without a motion. Okay, done. All right. So now, Ms. Berthoud.
This is a inquiry. I'm not going to put it in the form of a motion, but for our guests, would it be possible to move the Witness Stone project earlier into the agenda so that they don't have to sit through some of this other?
Some of the school stuff? Sure. Would you like to move the,
So I move to move new business item A, the Witness Stone project, to come after the consent agenda and before old business.
is there a second? Mr. Bruder seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, adopted unanimously. That means that the middle school is up next. So this item on our agenda is the creation of a witness stone. And I'm sure this will all be explained to us. Anybody who is speaking needs to be speaking directly into that microphone. Otherwise, it won't be picked up for the cameras.
Julie Hodgson, and I teach 8th grade social studies and English at Mansfield Middle. I guess a teacher's dream is when her students can explain something better than she can, and I am very confident that the students can tonight, so I'm going to leave it to them. This is
Hi, I'm Bella. We're very glad that we are able to come and talk about this project that we've been working on for the Witness Stone project. As 8th graders at MMS, we saw this as an opportunity and created projects about Titus and other enslaved people in Mansfield, so that we could honor and bring voices to the people that have been silenced all throughout history within our own town. Thank you.
Could you hold on just a minute while we're fiddling with the computers, because it's distracting to try to do both?
Folks at home see this. Ryan, can you nod if you can?
Yes, I can see it just fine.
Do we have a handheld microphone?
Hi, I'm Aubrey Rittenhouse. What is the Witness Stone Project? Its important purpose is to restore the history and honor the humanity of the enslaved who helped build our communities. The Witness Stone Project is inspired by the Stolperstein Project in Berlin, Germany, which seeks to honor Jewish people who were murdered by the Nazis. The project asks students to engage in similar work here in the Northeast so that they can honor enslaved people who lived in their own communities. Once students learn about their individual, they place a stone to honor them somewhere where they may have worked, worshipped, or lived.
Hello, I'm Claire Tolman, and to answer the question on the board, yes, people were enslaved in Mansfield, and this proves that slavery was not just in the South of the United States, but also in the North. And in doing this project, it helped us learn that people, like leaders in our town, enslaved people to work for them. And I don't know if you can read the document, but it shows names of important, like, people who enslaved, who had enslaved individuals. They included Shubael Conant, which you might recognize the name because Conantville, part of our town, is named after him. And then Bassett Bridge Road is also named after someone who had an enslaved individual, as well as Gurleyville. Okay, so the source came from, oh yeah, the Congregational Church in our town, and we used these primary sources in during our project to help gain information about Titus, who is the enslaved individual that we learned about, as well as others.
Hello, my name is Kayla. I'm talking about what we learned from slavery. From studying sources, we learned that there were 5 recurring themes of slavery: dehumanization, treatment of the enslaved, paternalism, economic of slavery, and agency and resistance. Dehumanization is the process of depriving people from positive traits, which made it easier for the ownership of people to continue. For instance, slave owners didn't give people who were enslaved a name. They treated people as property, listing them as a price. To add on, slave owners restricted the rights of people who were enslaved, as if they couldn't make decisions. The economics of slavery was what kept it going. Slavery benefited the economy so much, people justified it. Nevertheless, those enslaved would resist slavery by showing free choice, like learning how to read or write. It is important to remember that slaves were people who wanted freedom and never gave up. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kalyani T. Basically going to answer the question of who was Titus. Titus was an enslaved person in Mansfield, and he was never able to see his freedom. He lived his whole life enslaved by his enslaver Shubael Conant, who labeled him as 30 pounds. Titus was the son of Tobias and Peg, and he grew up in a large family and grew up doing many jobs around the property. He worked as a blacksmith, tanner, and butcher. In 1776, near the end of his life, he fought in the Revolutionary War for freedom. However, he never got to experience it. A lot of what we found about Titus is from town listings or Schubel's documents. The sources were preserved by local organizations, like Claire mentioned, and the information we received was obviously very vague, so we had to make lots of inferences. This isn't a proud part of Mansfield's history, so we understand why there wouldn't be a lot of information on an enslaved person.
Hello, my name is Zia Kashwan, and I will be talking about Shubal Conant. He was Titus's enslaver, and as was previously mentioned, you may recognize his last name, Conant, from the section of our town called Conantville. He was born in Windham, Connecticut on July 15, 1711, but he later moved to Mansfield with his parents. Shubal Conant graduated from Yale University for Law in 1732, and later went on to represent Windham in the Connecticut House of Representatives. He also served as a judge on the Windham County Court and the Windham Probate Court. And because of all of his successes as judge, he lived a very privileged life. But even because of his achievements, it does not justify the fact that he wrongly enslaved and owned several human beings, one of whom was Titus.
Yeah, Chen, I'm also an 8th grade student.
We learned about Titus, but we wanted to honor him, so we decided to have a witness stone, because learning about him isn't enough. We want to share what Titus went through in his life. So by putting a witness stone, other people can see what Titus, who he was, because enslaved people were not learned about, and to honor them, we have to learn about them, and we have to learn about their life and what they went through and how that's not fair. We decided to put the witness stone at the Mansfield Public Library because A, there's a lot of foot traffic, and especially with the new pavilion being made, more people can see the witness stone and see Titus. But also B, Titus never had an education. He probably never even touched a book because he wasn't allowed to. So we wanted to give him that light of, even though he's not here anymore, he has that place to be at the library, and we can show his memory that we accept him and we can put him by the library, especially because people go to the library to learn, and we want people to learn about Titus as well. We think this is good for Titus in that this will honor his memory, even though he's not here anymore and there have been mistakes that have been made. But with this witness stone, we are on our way to change those things. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. This project means a lot to us, and we are very glad that you have let us share all this information about Titus so that we can honor his memory. Hopefully this project will lead on to other projects and more information that we can learn about other enslaved people that not only lived in Connecticut, but also around America. Thank you. And we are also wondering if anyone has any questions.
I'm supposed to wait for other people, but I have two questions I really want to ask. Is there any way of finding out if he had any children, or if there are any of his descendants who stayed around here?
Well, he actually died, unfortunately, shortly after the Revolutionary War when he was 37. So most likely he didn't have any children nor a wife.
And my second question was, were you able to access any of the military records to find anything about his military service?
No, we found the records of just stating the list of, I think, names of people who participated or who signed up for the war. And so around the time we suspect that he participated in, the Battle of Quebec.
The Battle of Quebec, okay. Thank you. Other council members have questions? Mr. Katzenberger.
Well, first, thank you. I learned a lot, and it's a wonderful thing that you've done, not only to do the work, but also to take the time to present it to us. So thank you for doing that. It doesn't sound like it. Did he die because of the war for wounds, or do we not know?
As said, there aren't many records on enslaved people, but we suspect that because he died shortly after he was dispatched, like he was released from war, that he probably died from the wounds because he probably couldn't treat them either because he was enslaved.
Thank you.
We, something important that I didn't share with you yet is his stone, it's the stone that'll be placed at the library. It indicates that he served in the Revolutionary War. We have enough records to prove that. The students had wanted to put the designation of veteran on his stone, but we don't have unimpeachable evidence that he actually served. We know he was registered. We know that he went to the Battle of Quebec. We don't know exactly how involved he became. We also don't know if he voluntarily served or if he was conscripted by his enslaver. Because there was a practice at the time when enslavers could trade a person they were enslaving in lieu of their own biological child.
That was certainly true during the Civil War and other wars when there was conscription. It's certainly possible. Any other questions for Ms. Berthelot?
Thank you so much. Wow, what a great work you've all done, and I learned so much. Thank you. I guess my question is a logistical question. So how does the stone get placed? How does it stay safe when it gets placed? And so what are the logistics of that?
We had a pretty cool experience when we went to the library. Prior to going to the library, the students considered a number of different options in town, right outside of the town hall, next to the community center, in front of the Historical Society. And all 8th grade students voted and chose the library for the reasons that Mia stated. Last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, we went to the library. It was about 13 of us to have to examine different locations at the library itself, and that was something the students considered. The stone is much smaller than I expected. It's about 4 by 4 inches, and it's not as deep as would be expected. It was really neat. After the students narrowed it down to about 5 spots, a few of us adults were talking, and all of a sudden the students drifted away from us. And I didn't know what they were talking about, and about 5 minutes after that, they announced that they had a unanimous decision for the location. So it's very strategically placed. It'll be adjacent to or on the corner of where the new pavilion will be. And they chose this spot because they thought it would get its own attention and not be mixed in with the other Mansfield sign or the book drop and so forth. So the librarians, people were so accommodating. Mr. Aylesworth met with us, and the librarians seemed so happy to be able to host it. I think they were pleased that the students chose the library. And Mr. Treach, Bill Treach, came. He met with us. And we have a plan for surrounding it with some white stone and raising it just a little. But typically, they're pretty flush with the ground. And we'll do our best. And I just found out, too, we'll have to treat it about twice a year because of the way that they stain.
Maybe we need to mount it in something a little more significant. Any other, Mr. Shakin?
I know the Historical Society has done a little bit of work. I don't actually know how extensive it is on Mansfield's history around this. It's notable that 2 of our villages, we have a number of them, are named after people who had slaves. And so I'm curious if this has sparked any ideas for all of you of other things that we might do as a town to recognize that part of our history in other signage on websites, that kind of thing. I mean, there are roads named after at least 2 folks. And those roads are named after villages that have been named after those folks for a long time. I don't know how Warren and Eagle and everyone else, Eagle's not a real one, but how Warren and Chafee and everyone else fares in this historical investigation either.
Mansfield, Mr. Shuren comments, Colonel Mansfield himself may have been implicated. Have you thought about this at all?
We've had no discussions of that, but I do think it would be a very great idea if we could kind of find some way to honor that, whether it be having a list of their names and information that we can find about them. But I think that that's definitely something that we could work on and possibly get the town more involved in, because this was a bit more guided by us. So I think it would be cool to get the town involved in ideas about what they think we could do for that.
Maybe you can hand this on to the incoming 8th graders as their challenge for next year, to find out how many of these people own slaves and what we ought to think, how we ought to think about it. Mr. Aylesworth wishes to add a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to say before we, thank the 8th graders for their time, I just want to say more on a personal note, perhaps, than in my capacity as town manager, but I did enjoy very much the site visit to the library with the 8th graders to talk about possible locations and just hear more about the project. I just want to say, though, as the father of 3 young kids, 2 of which are recent entrants into Mansfield Elementary School, just how blown away I was by how thoughtful this group of kids is. And it's just, I think a tremendous matter of community pride that this is a reflection of our students and what they're learning in Mansfield Public Schools, and just a enormously compelling testament to just the quality of our community and then the quality of our public schools. And just really, really, really impressed for the level of thoughtfulness and analysis and everything that's gone into this. And just, again, as a father of young kids that someday will be in 8th grade, you set a bar really, really high, and very impressed by you.
Well, the bar is already really, really high for Mansfield Middle School science and history, social studies and history students. I have judged History Day for, probably 6 or 7 years now, and we have among this group one of the people who's going to go on to nationals for her performance. So this is a group of students who develops a really deep interest and a deep understanding of history from the beginning of time to the present. So it's not just, these students are terrific, and I really want to congratulate them, but I also want to congratulate the teachers at the Mansfield Middle School, because they have turned out some really splendid students. So thank you. Well, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again in some other aspect as you go through our school system and beyond. So maybe you'll sit on this side of the table sometime.
Okay. You can also contact us if you have any questions. I'm not sure. I'm sure you're getting emails or something like that, but please do, because we would love to hear ideas about more things that we could do to help the community. But thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is the financial statements. Mr. Katzenberger.
So I'm going to, as Ben Shakin mentioned, so I was unable to attend the Finance Committee meeting where we talked about this. This is just prior to tonight's town council meeting, so
Right.
Ben Shakin would.
I knew that. Mr. Shakin.
Thank you. I move acceptance of the financial statements dated March 31st, 2022, effective today.
And it comes from a committee, so it doesn't require a second. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Sure. I will just say that no surprises in here. We had a discussion about a number of these funds. For the most part, things that are showing deficiencies are things that we have expected, or if we didn't expect them when we budgeted, we've talked about and addressed them as a council. The most notable one is the Parks and Rec Fund. When we did our budget a year ago today, we did not anticipate the Delta variant or the Omicron variant or any of this COVID nonsense still happening at the end of this fiscal year, but it is, and so obviously Parks and Rec is still being affected financially by COVID. We also talked a little bit about the cafeteria fund and how some of those federal dollars are working as the federal government has continued to fund free lunch for all students, free meals for all students, lunch and breakfast. And then Charmaine explained the pilot grant funding as it's sort of shown here is something that is again, because while we've talked about how to expend those dollars and we've even made some decisions as a council, and we'll make more tonight, we did not budget to receive them a year ago, and so they are showing up as a significant surplus in state support for general government. So if anyone has any questions, I'm sure Charmaine can answer them specifically, but that is an overview of the Finance Committee's discussion, and it was a unanimous recommendation.
Mr. Coleman has a question.
Yeah, there was some discussion about ARPA funding, DPW projects. I think the culvert on Hunting Lodge Road, and I think there was 2 or 3 other projects in there.
I think that comes later on the council agenda, Mr. Coleman.
We can't approve this if it's later. I mean, if we haven't allocated the
No,
funds.
the Finance Committee adopted 2 separate sets of motions. One of them was for the financials in March, which is what we are talking about today. And the second set of motions has to do with the ARPA funds, which is item E under new business.
Okay, so the motions are going to come after the ARPA funding discussion of the council.
Answer.
Mr. Shaken.
Through you, Mayor. No, Mr. Coleman, through you, this motion is presented to you right now to vote on this item that you requested pulled from the agenda item, from the consent agenda. We are simply adopting a financial statement that shows the actual status of our books compared to how we budgeted them last May. That does not change if the council makes a decision tonight to adjust any of these funds. Those adjustments will be reflected in the next quarter's financial statements. I'm sure I'm not doing a professional accountant's job answering those questions because I'm not a professional accountant, but that's my layman's explanation for what a quarterly financial statement is for you.
May we proceed? Anybody else have questions about the March financial statements? It came from, with the unanimous approval from the Finance Committee. All right, all those in favor of adopting the March 31st financial statements as proposed, please raise your hand. All right, Mr. Coleman, are you voting against adoption? All right, so it is a one opposition, one no vote. The next item on the agenda is the new school building construction update.
Do you want me to introduce this, Madam Mayor?
Well, Mr. Walakonis is in the room, so I think we can, and so is Superintendent Lyman, so why don't we just start with them? Make sure that mic is on.
Thank you. I am joined online by members of our owner's project manager company, Colliers, Adam Levitas, and I believe Scott Pellman is here. We're also joined by Richard Sipik from TSKP, and the Superintendent Lyman is here with me. So I will just very, very brief few comments, and then I will pass it on to our project managers. So the building is coming along. Some positive things are that siding is going on. Windows started getting put in today. The roof will be completed in fairly short order, and so it's not going to be too long until the building is weather tight. A number of the rooms are framed and to the point where they're getting painted. Other parts of other wings are getting framed and sheetrock is getting installed. So there are a number of positive things. On the negative side, our builders are facing some supply chain issues, as you've heard. They've dealt with a lot of them and worked their way around them, but one big one right now that they're dealing with is a delayed arrival for their main air handling unit, which is going to go inside. And so that, among other things, is going to delay opening past the start of the school year in the fall. And so I'm going to pass this on to, I believe, Adam, who is going to give you some additional details on timeline and other progress with the building.
Thanks, Randy. This is Adam Levitas with Colliers Project Leaders.
Welcome.
Thank you. So as Randy alluded to, construction of the new elementary school continues to progress. As each week passes, you see more of the exterior layers of the building getting added. So in previous weeks, we had initial layers of the building going on in terms of a spray applied air vapor barrier across portions of the building. And then on top of that, having a nail board insulation. And now we're getting to some of the the external layers with some of the zinc paneling on the 1st through 4th grade wing at the rear of the building at the east side. So that has started, as well as windows arriving on site and starting to be installed today, as Randy alluded to. In general, the installation of facade is the big visual change you'll see over the next 2 to 3 months as the crews continue to work their way around the building, installing zinc panels and windows on some portions of the facade, and then transitioning to an eBay wood product on other portions of the building. And also, as Randy alluded to, there's continued roof decking and roofing installation work on the gym wing and above the cafeteria area. Those are ongoing this week. And at the main site portion of the building, the site contractor is continuing to install the various utilities and piping that are needed to service the building, currently focusing on some stormwater manholes and the septic force main to take all of the waste from the building and eventually tie it into the septic leaching field. At the interior of the building, drywall installation and taping continues throughout, with the pre-K and office wing starting to receive some drywall at the interior. Similarly, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing components, as well as fire alarm and sprinkler elements, continue to be installed. And the 1st through 4th grade wing continues to be the front runner in terms of progress, with painting occurring at some of the interior walls. So throughout the building, the 3 various sections, you'll see various stages of construction as Newfield and their crews continue to make progress where the progress is able to be made. And since the grade 1 through 4th ring was the first to receive a roof and get some weather tightness, that's why that section of the building is the furthest along. Outside the school, the intersection work at Route 89 and 195 is generally complete. So final striping revisions were finalized last week. So that work is effectively done, and looks pretty good. In the coming weeks, we have a lot of key coordination meetings scheduled and some other key utility works planned. So at the interior of the building, the main electrical switchgear the main electrical switchgear should be installed by Newfield this week. And in terms of some of the coordination efforts, next week there's a key kickoff meeting for the logistics of some of the nitty-gritty on the abatement and demolition of the existing school building, which will start after the school year lets out and all the staff and materials are moved out. As Randy alluded to, there has been a delay in the completion of the building that will not allow the building to be open at the start of the new school year on September 6th. And the reason indicated by the contractor Newfield is due to the delivery of essential mechanical and electrical equipment. Currently Newfield and the town, the architect, TSKP, and as well as Colliers are working to review the revised schedule to help inform the other activities that will be affected by this. So installation of furniture, move-in, etc. To that point, last week, a coordination meeting was held. That was fairly productive to help coordinate some of those last mile elements. So in this case, furniture delivery and ensuring that even though the building might not be able to be opened due to various requirements that need to be complete, there's still the potential to get the furniture delivered and on-site and installed to avoid procurement delays with those elements should they arise. So that was good and productive. And then similarly, Kelly Lyman and Peter Dart, Lauren Rodriguez, and the rest of the team have been coordinating in terms of how to move about the various staff and teachers to facilitate a delayed opening at the new building. So those conversations are ongoing. And then there's just a final quick update. There was a question raised coming out of town council insofar as some contaminants within the soils and the water. Accordingly, we coordinated with hazardous materials consultant, Langen, and they indicated that based on the test results that were conducted, they did not identify any VOCs, pesticides, or herbicides in the topsoil at the property. And similarly, in coordinating with the town public works, water samples were drawn in January of this year, which was after some of the geothermal wells were drilled. And there were no issues identified with that test. And that's part of a standard testing protocol that's required for schools. And that concludes my updates. If there are any questions.
Mr. Coleman. Mr. Coleman, before you start, I do want to say that we have scheduled an executive session at the end of tonight's meeting to talk about potential legal issues. And so I'm going to cut off discussion about items which might which might appropriately be left to the executive session. So question.
Okay, you can cut me off. I think I'm going to keep it pretty straight. I'm not going to go off base here much. The first question I have.
Well, I'm saying that for the whole council, Mr. Coleman, not just for you.
Okay, the question I have is about the April 28th. I saw a slide with the gymnasium. I think the floor was covered with water. What was the source of that water in the gymnasium, if you can recollect?
I don't recall the photo specifically, but to that point, the roofing is not yet installed on the gymnasium, and there's still the gymnasium wing is not weather tight yet. So if you're looking at the concrete floor slab and saw some puddles, that might just be for rain or something that has gotten in.
Okay.
So that's a known issue.
Okay. And that doesn't interfere with the vapor barrier or having moisture in when you put the vapor barrier on the outside of the building?
No, that portion of the building does not yet have a vapor barrier installed yet. So they're still working on those elements.
There was two new wells drilled on site, and there was two existing wells. Were the two existing wells abandoned properly and sealed, or are they still functional?
That I would turn to Scott or Richard, who were there prior to my joining the project, if you could advise on that.
I'll start. Yes, the existing wells are to be decommissioned and properly closed. We are aware of that. That's part of the plans and specs for the project.
Okay, so they still have to be sealed and closed, or that's been done? I didn't catch that.
I'm not sure if it's been done yet, but
Okay.
it is a requirement of the project that they be sealed and closed.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. I know parents have gotten the letter, and I'm sure there's been conversation at schools, and I know there's been extensive conversation at the school building committee, but just because there are people in town who watch council and may not have kids in the schools right now, may not be paying close attention, Randy or maybe Kelly's proper for this. You want to just sort of talk through what the plan is for school in the fall, given that we are thinking about moving into the new school sometime hopefully before 2023, but in the coming months, but we're going to start school off differently than we had originally planned and talked to the community about.
Yeah, certainly. So we are lovingly calling this Plan B, and it is also something that we knew from the start of this project was something we should be prepared with. The issues with procurement and the tight timeline right from the beginning made us believe that we needed to be prepared. So the other really important piece to this is that we have spent this past year working with staff and students and families on transitioning to a consolidated single elementary school. And that process has gone extremely well, but it also is really critical to the success of next year. And so we were committed to ensuring that next year feels like a consolidated elementary experience right from the beginning. As you know, Southeast School will be demolished, leaving us with only 2 elementary schools. It may have sounded like a simple solution would be to disperse the students from Southeast School to the other 2 elementary schools, when in fact that does not allow us to meet our goals of consolidation and of bringing all of our students and families and staff together as one elementary school. Further, it created some really challenging busing problems for us. So working with our transportation company and with our team that's been working on the transition, we actually created a Plan B that does allow students and families to be together, and teachers, I know I keep forgetting to say that, from the very beginning, which would be to place all pre-K, K, and 1 students at Vinton School and all grade 2, 3, and 4 students at Goodwin School. Working with our transportation provider, they actually will work out a plan so that if there are households with children who will be attending both Vinton and Goodwin, that they will be picked up and dropped off at the same time. So families won't have the added challenge of now what could be for them 3 or 4 different pickup and drop-off times. We also will likely need to adjust the start times a little bit so that Goodwin and Vinton start at slightly different times, allowing parents who are driving children to school time to get in between the 2 schools, and frankly, our buses as well. So we were extremely pleased to know that the transportation could be worked out. Teachers seem prepared to make the double move. We have been working with our teachers, supporting them in packing and the preparations for that, so that it does not have a significant impact upon their ability to provide instruction during the day. And at this point, while there may still be questions that all of us have, we seem to have acceptance on the part of all of our stakeholders, and certainly our administrative team and our teachers feel that they can manage this. So I'm very satisfied with the work that's gone on, and it's really a credit to our school staff that they're handling it as they are.
Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. An idea, I think this actually, I'm trying to remember where I got it, but I think I should give Greg Haddad credit for it, because I think he came up with it the other week. Is there just a plant in your heads? You don't need an answer tonight, but whenever the move happens, assuming that we are going to ask teachers to close up shop on a Thursday or a Friday and open a backup shop in a new building the following Monday or Tuesday, whether the community might be able to offer help in the move, help in the breakdown and setup of classrooms. I don't know if that idea has occurred to folks, but
it's a very nice idea. I will tell you that we've been working with a professional moving company who will support us in making the move out of the elementary schools this June. We have identified that there will be 35 classrooms that will need to move in June. And the professional movers will move all of the instructional materials and the furnishings that need to be moved and assist with setup. We talked with them today about where to store some things that are not going to be unpacked. When we get into the new building, the furniture will all be new, and it will have been set up by the companies that we've contracted with for the purchasing of the furniture. And again, the moving company will help us move the actual instructional materials, the boxes, into the building. One of the things that I think could be a real benefit from this is that we can involve the students more in the move-in so that they really will feel that it's more their place, because they get to help unpack the boxes and put the things up on the walls. And, you know, that's a strategy that we use now already in classroom setup. But I'm sure if there is any help needed, I know that we can plan on the community to come out and help us.
Thanks. And then I had an unrelated question, perhaps the only detail that council ought to concern themselves with, given our infrastructure, you know, planning and supporting the rest of this project in town. But since the referendum passed, which had a budget number attached to it in 2018, I don't know what construction inflation has been. I'm sure it's higher than this, but the consumer price index has at least increased by over 10% over 4 years ago. So where are we on budget? Are we still on budget? Are we under? Are we over? Is there an expectation that we'll finish the project with a shortfall or with a surplus, or right at even?
Adam, I see you're itching to answer that.
Always itching to answer that, yes. The project is currently trending on budget. We do not anticipate a shortfall by the end of the project, despite the consumer price index and other inflation elements. Those would only really impact ongoing change orders as they might arise. But the bid package has already been established. It was publicly bid for the lion's share of the work. So no shortfalls are anticipated.
Thank you.
I heard Ms. Lyman refer to this process as an adventure, and I think that's, if I were a parent, that would be a hard thing to swallow, but it's probably the best way to think about it. Any other council members have questions? Mr. Coleman, did I see your hand?
Yeah. Deputy Mayor Shaken had the suggestion of, and I think it's a great suggestion, to ask the community to help in moving to school, but are there any insurance regulations that would prevent the community help or even the students help?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. Scott Pellin from Colliers. Yes, you're exactly right. Until a full certificate of occupancy is issued, just construction workers and or movers who are considered part of the construction industry are allowed to access the building. So we want to try and get as much of the moving done, in advance, prior to getting our CO. So it's a wonderful suggestion, but we've even, as Kelly stated, had a very lengthy meeting today, and we'll continue to meet with our movers, planning these moves, which are fairly intricate. But I do think that we've got it covered with the professionals that can get the job done in the appropriate amount of time.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, thank you. It's hard to see it from what we can see so far, but I know this is going to be a wonderful building when it's finally done, and we're all really looking forward to it. I know that there are kids in town who are really looking forward to moving into the new building, and I hope the teachers are too. So, thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is a proclamation recognizing June as LGBTQIA month. Mr. Shuren.
Yes, before I make the motion, I want to say that this is one of the wonderful examples of social protest movements having achieved great goals over time. We have moved from the area when love dare not speak its name to now a member of the president's cabinet in charge of expenditure of trillions of dollars, some of which may come to Mansfield, is a member of the LGBT community. I would like to make the motion, move May 9th, 2022, to authorize the mayor to issue an attached proclamation recognizing June as LGBTQIA+ Pride Month. And would you like me to read the motion?
Would you read it? I mean, this is an achievement for us, so read it. And after you read it and we get into discussion, I'll ask Mr. Matoma and Ms. Bell to speak to it as well.
A proclamation in the town of Mansfield, Connecticut. Whereas the town of Mansfield is a welcoming, accepting, and affirming place to grow, and whereas Mansfield recognizes the importance of human rights, equity, and justice, And whereas the town of Mansfield's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual LGBTQIA+ community are a vital part of all fields and professions and contribute to a stronger community. And whereas the town of Mansfield is committed to supporting visibility, dignity, and equity for all people of the community. And whereas the town of Mansfield is dedicated to fostering acceptance of all its citizens and preventing discrimination and bullying based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And whereas Mansfield is strengthened by and thrives upon the rich diversity of ethnic, cultural, racial, gender, and sexual identities of all its residents, all of which contribute to the vibrant character of our town. And whereas the Centers for Disease Control recognizes that LGBTQIA+ teens are at higher risk to be the victims of violence and have increased rates of death by suicide when experiencing rejection from their families and communities. And whereas it is imperative that young people in the community, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, feel valued, safe, empowered, and supported by their peers, educated, and community leaders. And whereas the rainbow flag, also known as the LGBTQIA+ pride flag or gay pride flag, has been inspired hope since the 1970s as a symbol of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer pride and progress. And whereas the intersex inclusive progress flag, pride flag, highlights and celebrates the racial and gender diversity of the LGBTQIA+ community while pulling us ever forward in the march for liberation for all those who are oppressed. And whereas flying the intersex inclusive progress pride flag town hall throughout the month of June further symbolizes the town's celebration of diversity and support for the LGBTQIA+ community. And whereas love is love is love is love is love is love cannot be killed or swept aside. Now therefore, the mayor of the town of Mansfield, Connecticut, on behalf of the Mansfield Town Council, will hereby proclaim and recognize June 2022 as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual plus LGBTQIA plus Pride Month in the town of Mansfield, and urge citizens to actively promote the principles of equality, love, and acceptance throughout the community. And the mayor will.
Do we have a second to Mr. Sherman's motion? Mr. Bruder seconds. And Mr. Coleman seconds. We can have a whole bunch of seconds on this one. Mr. Sherman, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Only that, as I said, this is an example of much work remaining to be done, but we have to recognize what has been done and the amazing transformation in some ways of various parts of American society, of which I believe and hope Mansfield is a part.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Mr. Matoma, would you like to speak to this motion?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councilman Shuren, for reading that. And it's really moving to hear those words right now. I can't think of a more important moment to be adopting this and to be reaffirming Mansfield's particular commitment to be that safe, inclusive, welcoming, celebratory environment for LGBTQIA+ members. The Human Rights Commission is proud to put this recommendation before you, knowing confidently that that your support is there and that we have built a community that, while not perfect, endeavors to move us forward and to be at the leading edge of celebrating all members of our community. And I can say, and I'd like to hand it over to Katie Bell. One of the reasons for that is the incredible leadership of Katie Bell out of the youth services. And I'd like you to hear from her work in procuring the Progress Pride flag, which we will hopefully be raising in a few weeks, and the incredible programming that she's set up so that we go beyond just these words and these symbols, but really do build that community out. So Katie, let me turn it over to you.
Go ahead, Ms. Bell.
Thank you, and thank you
for having us on tonight to talk about this and for the council's support in this endeavor for now this third year that we brought it to you all, and your overwhelming acceptance and support of these endeavors. We're especially excited this year where the original plans for a celebration event are scheduled to come to fruition this June in a Celebrate Pride event for all ages, all towns, all allies to come together in Mansfield, where we'll be just celebrating. And we're so excited to have extra flags this year to go out. We've got some additional grant funding to support that event. And we're always just overwhelmed by the support that our community services organizations have for this event. And I'm always touched to see how excited our youth get about it. I have the privilege of working with the Mansfield Youth Pride Group, which is our middle school age group, and then Amy Nocton, who is a part of the Human Rights Commission as well, supports the GSA over at E.O. Smith, and they've been involved in helping us pick music and helping us do some amazing painting murals that'll be able to be out and to be used from year to year for this event. So it really cannot be stated enough how important it is for kids to see that flag flying and to see it in their community, and to know that even if at home it's not something they're ready to talk about, or they're not sure how to talk about it, or they know it's not safe to talk about at home, that they see in their community that they're valid and they're important and they're celebrated. And it really, it's suicide prevention, and it's an amazing way to do it. So thank you all.
Thank you. When I started teaching in 88, somewhere in those first 5 years, the Gay Pride group at Central did a public kiss-in at lunchtime at the student union, and nobody in my 1 o'clock class had ever seen two men or two women kissing. Nobody had ever seen it. And that was 30 years ago, but we have come a very long way in 30 years. And one of my concerns is that young people just assume that this is something to be taken for granted and don't realize that it's something that was fought for and unfortunately may have to be fought for again. We have made amazing progress, and the fact that we have a town that is willing to put this out front, literally out front on our flagpole, is something that I'm very proud of. Any other member of the council? Mr. Coleman.
Good evening. I just want to say I support this motion. I'm an ally. I've been working alongside the LGBT community in different aspects with the diversity advisory team at the University of Connecticut. Yeah, we have come a long ways. We got a ways to go, and I support you fully, and I support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Mr. Bruder?
I actually just had a question through you, Mayor, in regards to the flags that were discussed. I know that I've had a number of residents ask me, are they going to be available at the library? Does anybody know? Or
Ms. Bell, how do people get their flags?
So we actually are able to have doubled our number of small flags to give away this year. So we have 1,000 flags to give away. They will be outside of Town Hall, outside of the Senior Center, outside of the library, as they usually are. And we'll be having a bunch available at the Pride event on June 10th for Celebrate Pride.
Well, I hope the council will get a special delivery. I don't like to pull political power, but it would be very nice if we all got flags.
I'm sure that can be arranged. I think I know where to find you all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor of the proclamation honoring Gay Pride Month, please raise your hand. And it is unanimous. Thank you, one and all. And thank you, Glenn and Katie, for all your work on behalf of this opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is the Connecticut State Department of Education Summer Enrichment Grant. Mr. Aylesworth, and I suppose you would like Mr. O'Keefe to come forward as well?
I would. Jay alerted me earlier that he was in the room, so yeah, I'd
Yep.
have Jay come up. And while he's making his way, I would just say that the grant that we're discussing was a funding opportunity that we pursued last year to help families in economic need achieve camp experiences for their kids. Although the funding sort of formula and the expectations of local match have changed this time around, which is part of the reason why we're going before council tonight to provide an overview. So now that I see Jay's in place, I'll turn it over to him.
Welcome, Mr. O'Keefe.
Good evening. Yes, just briefly, last year, with the help of the Board of Education and Youth Services, Parks and Recreation applied for the Connecticut Department of Ed Summer Enrichment Grant. We considered it a very successful endeavor. 62 participants, about 13,600 in terms of dollars were provided through that grant, and we would like to team up with the Board of Education again this year, and also with some background support from Youth Services and getting the word out and other avenues to do that again this year. I'll handle any questions if you have them.
Any questions, Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, just from what I was reading, it's a need-based program.
Correct.
And what's the standard of need that the community center is using? Parks and Rec?
Sure. What we did is we worked with the Board of Ed to confidentially identify through them families that were involved with the reduced fee or free food program, and contacted those folks. The Board of Ed had handled that, and then those folks received 100% financing for summer camp. Last year, we initially weren't sure how large the turnout would be, so we initially held back to a session until per family or per child until we saw what the response was, and then we increased that. This year, we intend to increase the number of sessions that, if we are awarded the grant, that campers can receive up front.
Thank you.
Mr. Shaken?
Thanks. I'm in full support of this when we get there. I just have a question, which is that if I'm reading this correctly, and if I heard you correctly, the sort of criteria for eligibility for this is roughly students that are eligible for free and reduced lunch, which is a pretty common measure of sort of childhood access to various government services. And that last year, that caused us to have a grant pay for $13,600-ish on providing free summer camp to kids in need. And so is that sort of fair to assume that somewhere between that number and around $20,000, which is what this request is for, would be the annual cost to the town if the state grant ever went away, we decided that we wanted to offer free summer camp to kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch at school?
Well,
the current price of summer camp?
Yeah, well, using that criteria and having 2 years of data behind us at that point, it would probably be a good indicator. We had additional funding last year available to us. We didn't use it, which is why we kind of reduced the number that we're asking for this year. So I think 2 years of data behind us would give us a pretty good indicator of that.
Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Bruder?
Hey, Mayor, I'd like to make the motion.
Please do.
Move effective May 9th, 2022, to authorize the town manager to commit up to $10,000 in matching grant funds from the town's American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, funding allocation for the CSDE Summer Enrichment Grant Program to be used for the 2022 Mansfield Parks and Rec Summer Camp programs. If I could speak to my motion.
It's seconded by
After
Mr.
seconding.
Shaken. Speak to your motion.
Thank you for seconding it. I hope that other councilors will fully support this grant program. I think that it's a great thing that the Parks and Rec does. seems like the collaboration between the Board of Ed and the Parks and Rec did well last year, and I know from personal experience with kids, my kids haven't gone through some of these programs. They're amazing, they're fun, and it's a great opportunity. I would love to see this expanded even without the grant, as my esteemed colleague to my left has hinted at. But luckily, we have the option to get this grant, and matching funds seems like a no-brainer to me.
Any further comments? All right, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Mr. Coleman, you're muted. Are you voting against?
No, I have a question yet. Has this been pre-allocated ARPA funding? Or is it something that we have to allocate later on? Because I can't vote on something that,
It has not been allocated. Mr. Aylesworth?
Yeah, I would just say that this was not funding that was programmed as part of previous formal rescue plan funding recommendations that I shared with the council. The grant program and the need for this match requirement came about very recently, so it was not something that was foreseen. But if the council votes on this tonight to utilize a portion of our ARPA funding allocation for this purpose, there won't need to be a separate vote like at a rescue plan focused meeting or anything later. This would take care of that.
so as long as that we have as long as we have the money available, right?
Correct. So there's, as you may recall, there's certain monies that the council has not yet appropriated or allocated to anything, the projects that are still sort of being contemplated. And so the total amount of that money, unallocated ARPA funds, is considerably larger than the amount being requested here now.
Okay, thank you.
So everybody has voted on this. When I called for the vote, you were the only person who did not raise his hand. Are you voting for or against it, Mr. Coleman?
I'm for it.
Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. All right, the next item on tonight's agenda is the implementation plan for local business relief fund. The implementation plan for local business relief fund program. There's got to be some redundancies in that sentence, but in any case, Ms. Van Zelm has come to the table. Mr. Aylesworth, you wish to introduce this?
Yeah, sure. I'll say just a couple words. So the council will recall that part of the funding recommendations for American Rescue Plan Act funds included funding to provide some relief grants, if you will, to businesses that have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. The total amount proposed to the council back in the winter was $370,000 for that purpose. At the council's March 14th meeting, this fell in a category of funding recommendations that the council voted to authorize, but kind of conditionally authorized pending a implementation plan, policy implementation plan surrounding the request. And so in keeping with the theme of doing, one or so of these each month, this is this month's installment, and I will turn it over to Ms. Van Zelm to speak in more detail to what's being proposed here.
Excuse me, I need to recuse myself here. And if Mr. Aylesworth would send me a text after this discussion is over, I would appreciate it. I'm going to leave the meeting.
Happy to do so.
I believe this is because Mr. Coleman is a small business owner and would therefore be eligible for an application, which does meet our conflict of interest issues. Ms. Van Zelm.
Good evening. So just to add on to a little bit of what the town manager said, which covered in the AIS, and then I have put together a draft policy and draft application for your consideration. We did model the policy and the application after some of our colleagues' programs, including Wyndham, Rocky Hill, and Bridgeport. It would be used to fund, the fund would be used for, by established businesses. And we have put in a suggested amount of between about $2,500 to $10,000 with the option for an other category. It requires a couple of things from the businesses, and I did just want to mention a good standing letter from the Connecticut Department of Revenue, and we had a question amongst the staff about how long that would take to get, and my understanding is it would only be about a week. That was one of the concerns about whether have enough time to get that good standing letter. It also includes that the town manager will put together a review panel of the applications. We have suggested a 1-month application time period. So with the thinking that this would go out sometime
and I'll preface it with a comment that I think large this is very good. I think, you know, doing the math, we could be supporting a number of small businesses in town, 37 at minimum, and that's great. Just through work that I've done with state ARPA dollars, I know that there's often a proclamation from the federal government at the beginning of these processes around eligible uses, but then when it comes time to actually disperse the dollars outside of government into one of those eligible uses, it becomes clear that there's going to be fairly substantial reporting requirements back to the federal government, sort of certifying that the funds were expended in line with those eligible uses. I know business relief is one of the eligible uses, but does Ryan and Cynthia, do you all expect that we are going to be asking businesses in exchange for receiving these funds to then provide us with documentation after the grant has been given out, or is the level of documentation met by this application that will meet any audit requirements we may get from the state, given the state's renewed interest in municipal ARPA spending, or the federal government, or are you going to expect businesses to provide you with an accounting of how the dollars were spent after they have been expended that you could use to defend the expenditure in a future audit?
So in answer to that, this is something that I've asked finance to investigate a little bit. I know that some municipalities, and I'm trying to remember if it was East Hartford or I think it was East Hartford. In any case, municipalities that administered a program very similar to this right after the rescue plan was enacted, so long before there were any federal guidelines, you know, they in some ways have immunized themselves from reporting requirements because they administered a program before those requirements were known. But now that that's been codified, you know, my understanding is that it's not simply enough to, for lack of a better term, take somebody at their word that this is what they're going to use the funds for, and then kind of wash our hands of it. I do think that and I would defer to finance on some of the specifics, and we could certainly provide council with a little more detail about what that looks like. But my understanding, Mr. Shaken, is that there is after the fact reporting requirements. So to your point, if we were audited, make sure that the funds were in fact used for an appropriate purpose.
If that's the case, then I would just recommend looking through these documents that we make it clear. I know that there's an acknowledgement, which I will admit I haven't read with a fine-tooth comb, but that we make it clear to businesses that even if we aren't giving them those reporting requirements up front, because they may not be known to us, or the full breadth of businesses' use of these funds may not have been conceived by us as we put this stuff together, that, you know, part of the condition for receiving the funds is that we can ask for that information, and if they're unable to provide it, or if the funds are used in a way that's not an applicable use, and we need to be accountable for that later on to the state or federal government, that we can recoup funds that were used for purposes that aren't stated here. It's just a tricky thing, and it's happening all over the place. It's probably going to happen when we talk about aid to the social service agencies. It's part of this plan as well. I know it's a thing with the dollars that the state have been giving out, where the state is basically saying, we're not really sure what we're going to need from you in terms of reporting requirements. We won't know until we tell Treasury how we spent the money, and they come back to us with questions. And so you take these dollars, you need to just be prepared to tell us every detail about how you've spent them.
Yeah, I think I'll work with Cynthia on this and we'll consult with finance, but I'm thinking offhand that perhaps where we have a relatively detailed acknowledgement section on the form, that incorporating general language to your sort of what you're saying about covering any future auditing eventuality, we could probably do that.
Save all your slips, all the receipts. It's going to sound like another project that's going to cost more for a small business to do than the $2,500 they're going to get. So I hope we're looking at a way of making this as painless and effective as possible. Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, I really appreciate this draft version. And I don't know if there's been any discussion for being able to help business owners make sure that they can hit all the different criterias that are being looked for in this. I don't know if there's a staff member that a business owner could go to and sit down and fill out the application for. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just wondering if that's going to be something available for somebody that would want that.
Ms. Van Zel?
Well, I think there's probably a couple of different options. Certainly the Connecticut Small Business Development Center, I think they could potentially assist. Our office can certainly assist generally, but we don't have the financial expertise, so I just want to put that caveat in there. I think we've been pretty clear with what documents we're looking for. I think a lot of it's going to be, as to Councilor Shakin's question, on the back end, to make sure that all that documentation is what the town manager and the director of finance feel is appropriate and adequate.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready for a motion. Mr. Shakin?
Sure. I'd like to move to authorize the town manager to move forward with the implementation of the local business relief fund program using ARPA funds as presented.
Is there a second? Mr. Bruder seconds. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes. Again, this is, I think, a very well thought out and well put together proposal. I think in my opinion, it matches what the council has discussed throughout its deliberations on ARPA funding. As I said, doing the math with a $10,000 per business cap, we could help at minimum 37 local businesses that have been negatively impacted by the pandemic or had to spend money they didn't budget. I really appreciate that we are giving priority, reading through these documents, both to certified minority and women-owned businesses, small businesses, and veteran-owned businesses, as well, in particular, to businesses that did not receive any sort of prior COVID-related financial assistance, of which a fair amount was available, and for businesses that were savvy, many of them have availed themselves quite generously of different federal resources. So I appreciate that we're giving the priorities to those who didn't, because of this application, while a little complicated, is much less complicated, doesn't require an accountant the way most of the federal programs do. And I also appreciate that we have sort of restricted this program to businesses that have been in operation since the very dark days of the pandemic in early 2020, when businesses were really feeling the hit, and in later 2020 and 2021, when UConn students returned to town at about half capacity, I think, which is when the economic impact of COVID is probably most felt by the businesses in Mansfield. So I urge my colleagues to support it.
Any further comments? Mr. Bruder?
I actually had one more question in regards to the certified minority or women's. Did I read it correctly that it's self-certification, or is there some sort of outside organization, or is it Department of Labor?
Yeah. How do you know?
Yeah, I think either through the Department of Labor, that's another thing I can check with the Connecticut Small Business Development Center. What we meant on here was all the eligibility requirements, I think, in that note on page 1. I think that's what you're referring to, Councilor Bruder. Okay.
Thank you.
Are we ready to vote? Mr. Katzenberger.
Thank you. I certainly support this as well. I just want to reiterate, I think, the importance of yes, we need to get the information that's, to make good decisions and to check on the validity of the data. But I also hope that we do not ask, and are careful rather to only ask questions that are absolutely necessary. I've looked at the draft application in the packet, and it seems those, without being an expert in the policy, it does seem those are questions that are necessary. It would not take too long, and if that kind of application is the kind that would actually turn out, I think that would be good. But particularly here, you hate to see companies do dozens and dozens of hours of work for a very, very small grant. So, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, all those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. We are unanimous with the exception of Mr. Coleman, who has recused himself. Thank you, Ms. Van Zelm. We have been waiting for this for quite some time, and it's very good to see it in front of us at last. And I hope it benefits the businesses and the business climate in our community.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next item on our agenda is the transfers from 2021-22 to ARPA pilot and ARPA funding to meet our expanded goals in road construction. All right. This came out of finance, so this would be Ben taken.
I'm happy to make the motion that came out of finance. Do we want to have a short introduction from
Yes,
Ryan to go over it, since or Ryan and or
No,
Charmaine?
Yeah, let's get the town manager, Mr. Aylesworth.
Sure, happy to. So at recent council meetings, including the most recent council meeting, April 25th, there was discussion and clear signal, I guess, staff felt sent by the council, a desire to identify additional sources of funding that could be used and mobilized swiftly for the purpose of addressing pressing priority DPW projects. The Department of Public Works Director provided a summary, a document outlining how those funds could be used, a total of $1,555,000 worth of projects, which is inclusive of the recently unexpectedly failed culvert at Hunting Lodge Road, which itself is about $425,000 of that total. So based on that clear guidance and sentiments from council, staff prepared subsequent to that overview of how the funds could be used that was shared at the last meeting. Staff have prepared a recommendation for where the funding for that $1,555,000 worth of projects would come from. And we're proposing that the funds come from two different sources. One, in the amount of $1 million to come from the remaining portion of the remaining unappropriated surplus pilot funds in fiscal year 21-22. Council may recall from the last time you authorized the appropriation of surplus pilot funds, there was a whole list of things that we laid out for you that council voted to approve. We projected a remaining surplus pilot funds in the amount of roughly $1.58 million. And so if additional $1 million is used from those unappropriated funds, we would expect to end the year with $580,000 of unused pilot funds that would become fund balance. So $1 million of that $1,555,000 staff is proposing we use currently unappropriated pilot funds for. Second, the remaining $555,000 staff has proposed, and obviously the Finance Committee considered these recommendations tonight, that the remaining $555,000 would come from a portion of the town's presently unallocated American Rescue Plan funds. So the sum total of those two funding streams is $1,555,000. And I think that's about as brief a summary as I can provide.
Mr. Shaken.
So this was a conversation again in the Finance Committee. This is a recommendation from the Finance Committee. So I'm happy to make the motion if there aren't questions.
There are a
Okay.
series of motions.
There's a
Yes,
series of motions. I will make them together because that is how they were made. It's how they are
Yes.
recommended from the Finance Committee. Move effective today to increase the FY 21-22 pilot revenue line item appropriation by $1 million funded by the additional state pilot grant. Further, move effective today to increase the FY 21-22 general fund transfer to capital CNR by $1 million funded by the additional state pilot grant. Further, move effective today to amend the capital non-recurring fund and the capital improvement program fund budgets to fund $1 million of Project 1 as noted above, which is on page 201 of your packet, which is paving roads, including full-depth reclamation milling and overlays, a total cost of $1.1 million. And finally, move effective today to authorize the allocation of $555,000 from the American Rescue Plan Act funds for the balance of project number 1, which I just noted, project number 2, which is a $30,000 project to paint white shoulder stripes on every road that gets yellow striping, and project 3, which is the Hunting Lodge Road culvert replacement to include the engineering design, a total cost of $425,000.
Thank you. Just for the public, just as a reminder, when we budgeted for the 21-22 fiscal year, we knew that we were going to get some increase in our pilot money, but we weren't sure how much, and this was all concluded before we had a final number. And so we only built $800,000 into the budget, and we ended up getting over $4 million. So over time, we have been finding ways of using that money for various projects. According to the town charter, we can increase and transfer money between funds that are not part of the general tax revenue. So these are both of these funds, Pilot and ARPA, have come either from the state or the federal government, and so we can adjust them at will. Mr. Shaken, you wish to speak to the motion?
I do. So the council will recall 2 meetings ago, the first meeting of April, we allocated the other balance, the other part of the funds that the mayor just mentioned. We put them towards a variety of different capital expenditures, many having to do with public works in our roads, but others as well, facilities. But we left a portion of these dollars unallocated, and this is a recommendation from the Finance Committee to allocate $1 million of those dollars, which would leave, if everything shakes out correctly at the end of the fiscal year, another significant portion of dollars to be deposited into fund balance, to keep our fund balance at a very healthy level of at least 15%. You'll also recall then at our April, I think it was at our April 25th meeting, that John Carrington presented a document that sort of showed how without in this construction season, in this fiscal year essentially, doing drainage, what are the roads that we could get done that are in need of doing? And there are 3 sort of levels, milling and overlays on roads that do not need a full reclamation, and then basically the balance of all of the roads that need to be repaved at a full depth reclamation, but can be done so without replacing the drainage. And that is sort of the council discussed this as we adopted our budget and decided we wanted to tackle that in the next fiscal year as we consider how to sort of rapidly increase the pace of road paving on the rest of our roads, which unfortunately, as we know, all need drainage work in addition to reclamation work. So this is the proposal for how to fund it. I will say the other thing that I brought up at Finance that I will reiterate here is my desire, and I hope it's the desire of the councils, to use ARPA dollars as the sort of last dollar in for this, to spend the state, our budget surplus from state dollars first, so that as we close out the fiscal year, which often ends in an operating surplus, and we transfer funding to the various accounts as part of our closeout procedure, if there are dollars available that are not from ARPA that we can use to fund these projects, dollars that we haven't yet identified because fiscal year is not done yet, that we might consider using those funds at that time. Mr. Carrington has indicated that there's no way he's going to spend $1.6 million by August, and so we're not in any danger of all of these projects being done before that process completes. In fact, the culvert project is likely going to take months to get out of the engineering phase, and so the bulk of those dollars wouldn't be expended till the spring at the earliest. And the reason for that, I will say, just again, so it's on the record, is so that because this is a pretty big expenditure out of ARPA, we can continue to consider uses for those funds that are part of the manager's plan that he presented to us, or other things that we identify as community priorities. But for now, I think it's important that we that we leave some of these excess state dollars available for fund balance, and that we allocate $555,000 from ARPA, as this motion does, and as the Finance Committee recommended.
A very comprehensive explanation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Shaken. Does anybody have any questions? Mr. Coleman?
Yeah. We had a surplus of over $4 million in pilot funding, which is payment in lieu of taxes. That money should be treated like tax dollars and should be allocated in the general budget to be voted on by the citizens of Mansfield. I disagreed with it, the allocation in the early April meeting. Seemed more like a spending spree. We're buying all sorts of vehicles, and so I disagreed with it then. I disagree with it now. I cannot support this motion.
For members of the public, as a matter of information, these monies are being moved into the budget for the current year, which was voted on at last year's town meeting. The pilot money that we know we are getting in the 22-23 fiscal year is all included in the town budget and will be voted on tomorrow night at the town meeting. So from here on in, Mr. Coleman, your concerns will be addressed. The only problem is the error we made in underestimating state support for last year. And of course, the town charter does not require that we go to public vote on money that comes from the state. So, any other questions? Mr. Katzenberger.
Just a quick comment. It wasn't an error. It was actually it was a very deliberate decision made to be cautious because we weren't sure what the final number. So it was a
bet gone wrong. How about that?
Well, it's erring on the side of caution, and we get to have some now. Thank you.
Okay. Any further comment on this motion? Mr. Shaken for the second time.
Thank you. Just for the second time to add again, just a reminder that in odd numbered years, the legislature adopts a budget about a month after the town does. And so when there are big changes proposed to state funding, as the mayor and Councilor Katzenberger have noted, we often budget very conservatively because we don't want to be caught flat-footed with thinking we're getting more money than we end up getting from the state. So we were lucky last year that we were very conservative and the state came in well higher than our estimates, which is the money that we are allocating tonight.
And this year we know better because it's a short session and we know what we're getting.
Exactly.
And it's all of it's in the budget. Okay, for tomorrow night. So if you want to have a chance to vote on this budget tomorrow night. Any other comments on the motions before us? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. And all of those opposed. Mr. Coleman and Mr. Osberger are voting nay. All right, the next item on our on our agenda is the Mirror Lake Improvement Environmental Impact Statement.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Osberger.
I wonder only because that I hadn't heard the motion.
Well, it's in your packet.
Trying to
I understand. I'm glad you joined us, even though you weren't able to get here for the other. You missed the middle school student presentation on the witness stone, which was the highlight of the meeting for sure.
I've come from Westchester. to get here.
Oh, thank you for being here. You can abstain if you wish, and whatever you want to do.
I'll maintain my original.
Okay. All right. So now it's the AIS, the Mirror Lake Improvements Environmental Impact. Mr. Aylesworth.
So I'll turn it over to staff to provide a little more of an update. I believe we placed this on the consent agenda because while the town does have some thoughts and feedback to provide, as is laid out in the draft letter that's included for the council's consideration, we don't particularly view this as a high profile, high concern project. And I think we generally support the aims of the project if it's a project that UConn wants to invest its resources on. But Linda or Jen, I don't know if one of you wants to speak to this more.
I'd be happy to. I think Ryan summed it up. This is an EIE, an environmental impact evaluation per the SEPA process, the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act process. UConn has prepared this for improvements to Mirror Lake. The improvements are needed. They're to address this dam and spillway safety, manage stormwater and slow sediment accumulation, and improve aquatic health and water quality, and improve the function and aesthetics of Mirror Lake. So basically, the Inland Wetlands Agency reviewed this at their May 2nd meeting, and they authorized the chair to prepare a letter to co-sign with the mayor. They had a few recommendations. They overall felt that this project was it was time to do this work and was important, but they did make some comments regarding erosion and sedimentation control, use of native species, where the sediment, how the sediments that are going to be removed will be managed or disposed of, and then ensuring that there's appropriate public notice. And so there is a draft letter in your packet that outlines those recommendations. And I believe there's a motion, if you agree with the letter, to co-sign it with the mayor, to have the mayor co-sign it with the chair of Planning and Zoning, or rather Inland Wetlands for this.
Thank you. I've read the letter. I have no problem with it going out over my signature, but we need a motion. And let's start with, does anybody have any further questions for Ms. Kaufman? Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Fine, how are you?
Good. Question I have, there is a history of spills getting into Mirror Lake, chilled water, some diesel fuel and things like that. Has the sediment been tested for contaminants and heavy metals like that or anything like that yet?
That's not indicated in the environmental impact evaluation, but that is a recommendation that the Inland Wetlands Agency made, that they wanted to make sure that the sediments that were extracted both hydraulically and mechanically, that they were tested and disposed of appropriately.
So that's the Roberts Brook watershed, which feeds to the Fenton River, which goes to the Willimantic Reservoir eventually, correct?
Correct.
So that would be probably one of my biggest concerns, is that the sediment was handled very carefully there. I noticed you noted that in the letter. Thank you.
Mr. Osberger.
Inadvertently, Brian, pretty my question.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Would somebody like to make this motion? Mr. Shaken.
Happily move, effective today, to authorize the mayor to co-endorse the letter to the University of Connecticut regarding the Mirror Lake Improvements Environmental Impact Evaluation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second is by Mr. Osberger. Mr. Shaken, do you wish to speak to your motion?
I think it's been covered.
Okay. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please raise your hand. I believe it is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. All right, the next item on the agenda is reports of council committees. Does personnel have a report?
We have not met, but I would want to say that we're soon to begin the process of evaluation of the town manager, which will be completed some months hence. And I'll be in communication with those who are not members of personnel and welcome their input as well.
Okay. Finance?
Well, as reported earlier, Finance met today with and the work was reported and the motions voted on as presented by Ben Shaken.
Thank you. Committee on Committees?
We're meeting on Thursday.
Okay. And that's the committee reports. Department and Advisory Committee reports, any comments on those? Petitions, requests, and communications? Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, as Mr. Manville's concerns been addressed by management.
I had a conversation with with Mr. Carrington, the Department of Public Works. We looked at the letter, and I have no concerns with his understanding of it. There's been a great deal of discussion about complete streets, and I have had some misgivings about this project myself. However, if you look at the motion that we adopted about complete streets, it refers to new streets. We have repaved old streets, but there have been no new streets in Mansfield since the adoption of the complete streets proposal. Although I believe that if we look at some of the new developments, we may get some in the future. But at the moment, as of now, there have been no new streets. So there were some other issues, but I personally have been satisfied that the Department of Public Works has met its obligations on these issues. And Mr. Manville is occasionally incorrect in his interpretation. And not only that, but his accusations against town staff are truly unwarranted. Any other comment on?
How about the ADA concern that Mr. Manville had down there at the in Mansfield Center?
That is an issue by state requirements. The problem there is that there is no path to connect that particular access to. So it was pointed out to me that the state often requires these things, but doesn't require that they be connected to a pathway that is usable or accessible. And so since we don't have an absolutely unlimited budget, not everything was perfect. Let's put it that way.
I think it was an oversight. I mean, the bus stop is so close, you could have ran that little piece of walk down to the bus stop, make it accessible to handicapped wheelchair people.
Well, there's going to be more work on sidewalks. The big sidewalks are going to be the ones up that hopefully we will get funded on 195 further up, further to the north. Any other concerns with communications? Mr. Osberger?
They're not communications, but a question that I could address
Regarding?
Helping Hand.
It's not on the agenda for tonight.
Also, that was something I could add on a few.
Yes, if you want to have save it for future agendas.
Thank you.
Which is right now.
How about that?
So you would like to add a report on Helping Hands?
Well, I would like to know what the remaining balance is, and I've had numerous emails from constituents about how much money is left. grown accustomed
Okay.
to or been happy with.
We will get an update on the,
Well, the nurse, if the program is going to end before the December deadline, and the funding will be there.
the whole works. And part of Mr. Aylesworth's manager's report had to do with the hiring of the new person that we authorized at our last meeting in Human Services. Mr. Aylesworth, would you like to speak to that issue since it?
Well, I guess on that particular front, we are moving forward with the hiring of a community assistance coordinator. As I indicated in the report, and as the council recalls, the funding for that position is available for a June 1st start. So we're trying to get that position filled by the end of the month if possible. Happy to provide the council an update on our plans for the Helping Hands program. Staff have actually made a progress in key areas in terms of working with an outside vendor with expertise in food distribution that we can provide the council with an update on efforts we're putting in place to help basically streamline things considerably the rest of the way out.
Good, we look forward to that. Mr. Osberger?
And if we could have a general accounting of where we were and where we are. And where...
Yes, that will be part of the report.
That would be part of it.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Okay, the next item is an executive session. Mr. Shaken.
I move we enter into executive session to discuss strategy and negotiations with respect to pending claims in accordance with Connecticut General Statute Section 1-206B. And to that executive session, we invite Randy Wallakonis, Kelly Lyman, Ryan Aylesworth, Scott Pellman, Adam Levitas, Rizard Sipek, sorry for your name.
Richard.
Kevin Deneen, and I believe
Mr. Alan Corson, I think.
and Mr. Corson. I believe that, does that cover it, Ryan?
I think you've named everybody. Yep.
Okay.
All right, we will take a
Second.
5-minute recess.
Second
Oh,
and a
we
vote.
need a second on the motion to go into executive session, seconded by Mr. Bruder. All those in favor, please raise your hand. We are going into executive session.
And the booth needs to not get kicked out, remember last time?
Yeah, we went over it earlier, especially in light of the fact that I wasn't going to be in the room. So I think we're all set, and Tasha will be making me the administrator. So if somebody gets booed out that shouldn't, it falls on me, but I'll be managing it carefully.
Okay, so 5-minute break.
Recording stopped.
I think that's everybody, because the other people are in the room, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
You want me to just pack up whatever's down there and put it in the break room or in the fridge?
Yeah, there's nothing.
Oh, okay.